Nate. I'm one of the graduates at Aotearoa this year, and I have the honour of introducing Leanne. So a little bit about Leanne. Leanne is a seasoned leader in the convergence of technology and sport, serving as the president of RugbyDAO, which innovates rugby through decentralised fan engagement. A former New Zealand football representative, she has played pivotal roles in youth engagement for FC Barcelona as head of Web3 and innovation for New Zealand Rugby previously. Her work spans various sectors, including the IOC's Innovation Hub, horse racing, football, social impact, working with athletes, and many more. At RugbyDAO, she is at the forefront of using Web3 to democratise and enhance sport. And I was lucky enough to hear Leanne speak a few weeks ago at our NSO Tech Hui. And what I like about Leanne is she's very future focused. So she's not worrying about today, but she's looking 10, 15 years into the future. So the stuff that she talks about today is setting us up to think about what our next generation of fans, of participants, will likely be interacting with and using. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Leanne.
Thank you, Nate, and kia ora, everyone. You're bang on, really. That was quite a mouthful to introduce me, so apologies for that. But yes, pleasure to be here today. I nearly got foiled by the fog. I come from Taupo, so my flight was cancelled at the very last minute, and I actually had to get a rental car and drive up. So kudos to whoever organised that very quickly. But I made it, so it's a pleasure to be here and fortunate to speak to you today about what is, yes, very future-focused, but can be quite confusing. So I will take my time to try not to overwhelm you, but give you enough information to really and take it and go from there. So a bit about me. Really spent my career in sport within digital innovation and youth engagement, and become very much a strategist for this. So work consulting across the sporting landscape. And really what I guess I try to do is spend my time understanding the emerging trends and then how we can actually apply them to meet those needs of our future participants and also fans. Some of the organisations that I've worked for is really fan-focused, right? So some of what I do is very commercial, trying to, I guess, tailor that today into what that means for participation as well as just pure fandom. Actually, before I go into this, I will say I'm very, very happy to take questions. I know that there is a digital medium that I have them coming up here as well, but I do not mind. This is a very open platform, so I do not mind anyone jumping in and asking in the moment. But to frame up today, really the point of time that we're in at the moment is that we're at the cusp of a fundamental shift in technology at a time of rapid digital transformation. Not only that, but we're also going through a significant generational change, right? The uprising of Gen Z and then what's coming from Gen Alpha and how different they are compared to the other generations due to the technology that they've grown up in. And then really what I'd like to do is look at how that is impacting sports consumption, the engagement that we're seeing, and then, in my opinion, how that's actually changing the role of sport in society, right? So really kind of this macro shift that's happening and what that's going to mean, and then hopefully how to deal with it. So to start through, I'll take you through the technology. I do go into Web3 here, so the idea is to kind of impart some of my knowledge to a level that's not overwhelming, but hopefully useful. So no further ado, let's kick into that first part and look at the technology shifts that we're undergoing. Okay, really at this point in time, there are three major pillars of technology that's really coming upon us all at once, and that's really what's kind of creating this disruption across industries, and sport is really no exception here, right? One of the biggest ones, and ones that we'll be very familiar with right now, is AI. There's an entire session on this afterwards, so I'm definitely not going to go deep into this. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert either. But really, AI is really leading to this like hyperparabolic productivity, right? So what we're about to see is expertise go to completely democratized access. So we'll actually be able to learn, have a base knowledge of a lot of stuff, right? The key thing with AI is that it's actually been around since the 50s, right? So what we're now seeing is that hockey stick end of a technology coming right into the forefront and into daily use. Again, we're going to really concentrate on that a lot after, but really what's happening here is we're blurring the lines between what is synthetic and what is actually happening and real and tangible. And whilst this is very foreign for us, you have to remember a younger generation now grows up in a world where, so today 10% of content online is synthetically created, but in a matter of years, or even just next year, they reckon it'll be up to 90%, and it'll be nearly impossible to tell the difference between what that might be. So when you think of a sporting context growing up in this world, it might not matter if this thing is physically happening, is created by someone human. Those things go out the window when you're a younger generation and just grown up this way. We're also, the other kind of pillar that's happening here is really the metaverse. You will have heard the term the metaverse was very hot a few years ago. Really, this is an immersive version of the internet, right? So we already spend a lot of time here. Hands up who spends a lot of time on Zooms. This is the metaverse in theory, right? And what this is doing is, again, blurring lines, right? So what we're blurring the lines between is physical and digital. You most likely have seen the Apple Vision Pros. What's going to happen is we're actually going to be able to move into these worlds and feel like we're there, right? We're not far away from that technology being kind of just day-to-day and accessible. But what we are seeing is manifestations of the metaverse that are incredibly popular, again, with these younger generations. So if you have children, you're probably very familiar with Roblox or Fortnite, if not both, maybe slightly depending on their ages. The incredible thing about Roblox, 80 million daily active users. That's how many kids are on this. And I say kids because I think I've got the stat here. 60% of the Roblox users are under 16. I have a 4-year-old. I'm not proud of it, but he loves Roblox already. And so I have a daily battle to make him see the world. But this is, how integrated this technology is. And what's also amazing is that 20% of the users that are there, they have an avatar. They'll change that avatar daily. And what we're seeing is they're actually prioritizing that avatar over their physical self. So we're very, very much moving in this direction. Actually, just before moving on, the other thing about Roblox is it's completely user-generated, right? So it's not like it's a platform that the platform itself doesn't build the games. The kids that come in and use the games build the games, and there's 40 million of these games. If you want to check for a sign of health to whatever you might be doing in the world, a really good way to go on is go to Roblox and search the experiences and see if you turn up there, right? So I spend a lot of time in rugby. The sad thing about that is we know there's a disconnect with this next generation. When you go on Roblox, rugby nearly doesn't exist. There's about 5 or 6 experiences. And this has been a platform since 2012 and generated by children. So you can actually see what's resonating and what's not. And it's probably much, much more valuable than a Google search at this point in time. Okay, the third and final one, which we will dig into a little deeper, is Web3. Now, this is can be hard to get through, so I'm going to do my best to kind of step through us nice and slow. But really, it is a decentralized user-owned internet. And really what this is doing, if I have to put this into kind of what does that really mean, it's really blurring geographical lines, right? Because now all of a sudden, we've got a virtual network of computers, which I am going to take you through and go into. But really what we're starting to do is be able to see much more of this global coordination. So what used to require us to sit in rooms and trade and go through maybe centralized entities that are on your local, in your countries, is now moving very much virtually, very much online. And in a way that we are very much peer-to-peer, so we don't need those sort of third parties in the middle. So we're leaning towards this more interconnected world, if we can believe that, even more so. In theory, utopia is it's more equitable, and online communities now become very global. You can share ideas, share experiences, and even share value creation and treasuries and things like this. So let's dig into that a little more now. And again, feel free to ask any questions. Okay, so just a quick short history of Web 1 through to Web 2 and then Web 3, where we sort of are now. Web 1, we're all very familiar with that. That's when you used to have to get someone off the phone if you wanted to go onto the internet. It took probably 10 minutes to get on it. And then if someone did pick up the phone, that would interrupt everything you were doing. But really, they termed this read-only, right? Because the information was very much one way. So it was free to share, so there was user-generated content. The thing was, there was no way to actually talk back to or interact with. You could just take it in, and that's all you could do with it. So really what we got was like, if anyone remembers in Carter, it was like, instead of needing your Britannica, however big that was and how many bookshelves you might have needed, that really went online. We could access that sort of information. But it was a one-way network, largely open source back then, but really one lost out when Web 2 really came along. And this is the ability to read and write, right? So this is really the rise of these social platforms that we're all very, very familiar with, still very ingrained in today's internet use. What kind of went wrong here is that we were enabled, like it was a better version of the internet, and that we could then connect with one another and actually form social arrangements. But effectively what happened is these platforms became using us as the labor, right? We're providing a lot of value by creating this content which brings people there, which they monetize, and that has sort of turned the user into the product, if you will. It's generated an enormous amount of data, which, if you think about what we talked about AI, data is that new oil, right? So this enormous power, and that now sits in the control of roughly 5 companies. So Web3. Really it is a grappling of that ownership and control being distributed between whoever might use it. So they called it read, write, own, and the reason for that is really that ownership is, instead of in the hands of, say, 5 companies, can actually be in the hands of all of us in this room and anyone that uses the internet. And that is, again, there's some utopian kind of vision around that, but it can work in terms of being decentralized and then also trustless, and that's what I'm going to step through now with how it works. Okay, so best way to think about it is 2 layers. The first layer is infrastructure. The second layer is application, so what's built on top of that infrastructure. So to talk you through the infrastructure layer, what we're talking about here is blockchain, and no doubt everyone's heard of that word, and probably it makes your head hurt a little. It certainly did, I know, when I first came across it. And I am not into finance, so the first uses of blockchain were actually DeFi, or decentralized finance. That certainly didn't really interest me, and so I stayed away from it. But what we've seen here is, and the picture is very telling, right? So what you actually see here with blockchain is it's a decentralized virtual computer network. So these computers may sit all over the globe. The more that there are, they call them nodes, the more decentralized this is. And they create effectively like an engine. But what they're doing is actually storing a copy of a ledger, right? So this is the copy of truth and transactions and things that are happening online. There's validators, there's nodes that are validators. They actually come to a consensus to say that this new thing's happened, I say it's like this, and if we're all in consensus, that thing gets added to the blockchain. What you have to have is obviously 51% of the network agreeing that that thing gets added, and that's why it's very hard to kind of change and manipulate, because you'd actually have to get 51% of the people all around the world all to do it wrong or incorrect in order to kind of break it. The thing with the validators is that there's some game theory here. And this is how it actually stays working and stays positive. And I can see people taking notes. I think there's a chance to have the slides later, so feel free. We will definitely share this afterwards, because it is a lot to take in. The validators actually earn tokens by validating, but they also risk it. They do what they call proof of stake, right? So they actually have to put the tokens up and stake them. If they were to do anything incorrect or stand out from the crowd and be incorrect, they would lose that stake. So they're actually incentivized to do it, or disencourage, I guess, bad actors, right? So you actually want to keep your money that you're staking and earn more, so you're incentivized to stay and just put out the truth. The more nodes, the more decentralized. The decentralized layer, as I said before, basically means that there's no single authority in control. So it becomes very, very hard to alter or delete. The second part to the infrastructure is really, so if that was the engine, this is the piece of code that tells the engine how to operate and what to do. And what they call them is smart contracts. Now what these are, or how this is interesting, is that they're actually self-executing contracts. So if you think of today just how we write contracts, what these are is code that is submitted to this distributed ledger, so they can actually execute all by themselves. They don't need anyone to do so. As long as those parameters are kind of happening and actually hit, the code will act. So what happens is that you have a few lines of code. These things can enable like trustless and automated transactions, so we can, in the terms of finance, you don't actually need a bank or a central entity to actually transfer these things. They're deployed to the blockchain, which means they're immutable. No one can then take them down, change the rules or anything. Therefore, the trust is built in, right? So this is where we normally need a trusted central entity. We actually don't need it because it's in the code. So anywhere there's a third party, effectively, this could now be handled by a smart contract. And this is where this sort of change is coming from. The cool thing about a smart contract is what can be coded is really up to our imagination, right? So we've seen very basic use cases so far, which are, tokens being traded, so bought and sold peer-to-peer. But really there are, an unlimited possibility of what can actually be put into a smart contract and therefore what can be executed on the chain. That, again, will never change. And I've got some applications later to kind of show you how these things work. But then to step up above this, so what actually then sits upon a smart contract, and this is what we're sort of familiar with, this is what we see on the other side as maybe the end user, this application layer. So we definitely have seen tokens, right? And tokens go from everything from, cryptocurrency to meaning a whole range of different things. They are fungible and non-fungible. Most of the room will have heard the word NFT or the acronym NFT, so that means a non-fungible token. The difference between fungible and non-fungible is fungible is like a dollar coin. I don't care which dollar coin I have, they're all the same. But non-fungible means it's unique. There's something to it that's not the same. So we could both have a black Labrador, but my Labrador is different. It's non-fungible. They can represent currency, they can represent ownership, they can represent access rights, they can be this mechanism to coordinate and share. And this is, again, what interested me, right? This is this coordination layer that all of a sudden puts everyone in the room in the same boat. Like there's a reason then to work together and actually make this token worth what it's supposed to be worth or do what it's supposed to do. And not forgetting that these people can be complete internet strangers. You don't actually have to know who each other are. It doesn't really matter as long as your wallet's holding that thing. You can work together. So what we're seeing come out of this, and I explained it a little bit before on how the actual blockchains operate themselves, is these token-powered networks. So in the case of Ethereum, which is a crypto currency, but it's its own blockchain as well, so it's the infrastructure layer. Ethereum is the token that sits on top of that. This is how it's used to actually incentivize the network and incentivize this decentralized virtual computer network. So you all have ETH. This is what aligns you with the network goals. Those who validate are rewarded that Ethereum. They also risk it if they stake it, of course. They get it as a base fee. Every time there's a transaction, they're getting a little bit more. The more they get, the better they obviously become, or more involved in the ecosystem they become, and the higher they want that value. Again, this is why it's just incentivized to be a bad actor, because if something happened, everything they're holding would be worth less. But NFTs, which are the non-fungible versions, can be used as memberships, access to exclusive clubs, be it online or in physical sense. And we've seen a lot of examples, again, of sharing IP rights. So there's actually commercial terms written into these smart contracts that allow you then to monetize the IP behind whatever you might own. And then the fourth thing is really, and this is all-encompassing, but they call them dApps. So a dApp is a decentralized application. And the best way to think about this in terms of my big analogy with the engine is think of this as like the App Store, but on a decentralized internet. So completely permissionless, anyone can build a decentralized application. Examples we see are, say, marketplaces with fees set in. So if you think of, say, TradeMe, who can say one day to the next, so we're changing our terms and conditions, we're actually going to take 30%, not 12%. This stuff is programmed in from the start. So when you're buying and selling and trading on these platforms, the fee might be more like 2%, and it's coded in, hard-coded in, so it can never change. But we're also seeing decentralized social media platforms starting to become popular, where the users actually own their content and data, right? So again, if these things were monetized, the money or the value that's actually created by you creating your content comes back to you in the form of tokens. So you're incentivized to create more and participate more. And we're also seeing things like DAOs, which Nate correctly mentioned that I'm a part of many of them. And they're essentially decentralized autonomous organizations, and a horrible mouthful, but really a new way to kind of coordinate a group of people that might rally around a shared interest. And the best, easiest way is to think about that as a group chat with a shared bank account, right? So think of your WhatsApp groups. You could actually frame up and put a shared treasury behind that, and then you can deploy that capital to whatever you might like to do and whatever you might like to achieve. So we're seeing a lot of examples come through of that across the board, right? So there are examples in sport. Constitution DAO was a really interesting example of passionate American citizens who came together to try and buy the Constitution. They actually managed to raise $41 million to put in their bid. The only problem was that it was on completely transparent ledger, so the competition knew exactly down to the dollar what they had to put forward and outbid them. I think it was literally by $1, so they lost. But you can see what kind of can happen, the coordination to bring in fairly substantial amounts of money, and I've got a little example soon. And another good one is VitaDAO, which is actually, they call it DSci, so decentralized science. So a bunch of researchers researching actually longevity of life now pulled together. They deploy capital together to fund research that they want to go and see. And it's had investment from pharmaceutical companies. I think Pfizer's a big investor, because really what it is kind of pulling in this knowledge from around the globe and coordinating in a way that's really interesting. We're also seeing uses in gaming. And if you think of what I said before, Roblox, so that's a centralized platform that everyone builds on. They own all that data. They do everything. What we're seeing is decentralized versions of that, where you can come in, create your own space, you own your own land. No one can ever change that or take it off you or turn you off. And again, when you go back to how important this is becoming for these younger generations, you know, these are the worlds that they're likely to be building in and spending a lot of time in, coming for us. So to give you some examples of some things happening. This is Nouns DAO. This is weird, right, because it's not in sport, and don't worry, there are some sport examples coming. But a really, really interesting use case of the smart contracts, but then also this kind of decentralized autonomous organization. So this is Nouns DAO. What it actually has really created is a headless brand. And it's completely operated by code and its community of token holders. So every 24 hours, there's a piece of code that actually tells it informs what that little piece of artwork will become, right? So there's a little avatar, and they call it a PFP or a profile picture. So you might actually own this, you might actually put it on your Twitter profile or whatever you might like to signal that you're in this group. So each day, a brand new, unique version of that pops up, right? And that's completely generated by code. No one ever has to do anything, it just happens. Each day, this noun, this little animal or whatever it might come out like, is also auctioned. So it's auctioned off to the highest bidder over a 24-hour period. Obviously, the winning bid goes through as it runs out of time. As that bid finishes, what it does is triggers tomorrow, right? And this will happen completely indefinitely. Like there is literally not a day that this will not happen now. You can see we're about 1,040. That was a few days ago. It's been going for just over 3 years. When this is sold, what happens is the entire amount of money then gets transferred to the shared treasury. And if you are a token holder, you get access now to deploy that shared treasury with the other nouns holders. So every single dollar that gets auctioned here goes straight into the shared bank account, if you will. And you can see that they've actually raised nearly $19 million. So they have $19 million to play with. And what they have on the other side of it is what they call prop house. So anyone, you don't have to be a token holder, can submit to a proposal to this prop house, which token holders vote on. And the proposals are, in theory, to come along like a criteria that you think of the brand that we're trying to get awareness on, grow the brand, grow awareness. Anything that will grow the awareness, we will support. So you're allowed to propose anything, and then the token holders vote and go, yes, we want to do that thing. And they've built skate parks, they've paid for concerts to take place, they've done all sorts of crazy things out there. But because this is immutable and on decentralized internet, like I said, it'll happen every single day. The way that the founders actually are remunerated is every fifth one goes straight to their treasury. So they have a shared wallet that they actually get it. So they never pay for these things, but every fifth noun is theirs. And then they can sell that on the open market or deploy the capital. So that's how this thing all works. We are starting, that's a very outside, very Web3 kind of crazy use case. We are starting to see it now move into more mainstream. What we call, this is Kiki World, and it's really a community-powered commerce. So, yep. Nouns? Yep.
So is it just a good thing, like so building skate parks and so I'm feeling good about, being part of this and that?
Yeah, they're nouns branded. Yeah.
It's just like it's a good community thing to do.
Yeah.
Wine parks and
Yeah, and do we think by doing that action will proliferate the brand, more people familiar with nouns, therefore might want to buy in, therefore the value of these things stay high. So it's really the sort of self... Great. And, that belonging, right? I belong, I identify as a noun. I'm part of a noun's holder. There's only 1,139 of us. But yeah, you're exactly right. Moving more into mainstream use cases. This is a cosmetics company founded in 2023. What it does is innovates on the traditional beauty industry, but really what they're doing is building a network or a platform for community-powered commerce. So what they do is allow consumers to actually vote on the products that they're creating, which is not that novel or crazy. But as they vote, what they're doing is earning points, which allows the consumer ownership in the company, an ownership stake in the company. So as you are more involved, you're becoming more involved, and obviously you then wish to see this thing succeed because you're an owner. And what we're seeing with this is also it's win-win-win in the sense that the community is telling the company what to make and create, which means they're not creating the wrong things, which means there's less waste and it's more sustainable, which is also resonating. But also that when you launch something, it's actually into a group of advocates, right? These people that are really your 1,000 true fans that are really into what you're doing. So majority of the case that they release something, it's completely sold out and it hits its target straight away. And so it's a really interesting model. Okay, now to actually bring it into the room and bring it into sport, which again, we are seeing some really interesting use cases. We've also seen some probably bad ones, but this is a very interesting one where we're actually seeing a decentralized sports league. This is Karate Combat. It's a non-striking, full contact striking, but it's not quite UFC, it's karate rules. But effectively it would be a decentralized UFC in theory, the way it works. So what they do is there's a token that sits in the middle. It's called Karate. Very, very clever branding, of course. Didn't take a lot of imagination. But what that's made it is it's now a DAO, right? So both the athletes and the fans can hold karate tokens. They vote on where the league goes, where it's actually physically being run and operated, and then who fights who. The fans and the token holders can actually vote on these things. So it's really, really participatory. And what they also do is work with a whole nother layer. If you think about the metaverse, so they actually stream this in an AR environment as well, so you can actually access it like that. And the token economy, which again, if you're have another thing called up-only gaming, so you can actually sort of wager on the outcomes of these things. You put your karate tokens at not really at risk because you can't lose them, but you can earn more. So the more you kind of get involved, the deeper you participate with this, the more you earn and the more involved you become. So a really interesting look at how a league's using it. Yeah, go. Yep. Yes. The revenue model. So you'd still be paid in fiat cash as well, so like selling tickets and all the rest of it, but you also earn these karate tokens, which is ownership of the league itself. So if you're a fighter, you'll be paid in cash, but you're also earning karate tokens. So yeah, you become more deeply involved. So it's sort of dual. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay, another really interesting, more around less a sport, but around participation or getting active, right? So they call this move to earn. There's a few examples of this around. This is probably the most prominent, and it's called Steppen, out of Asia predominantly, but recently done a big deal with Adidas to release a set of virtual sneakers. So the way this works is that you actually reward movement with their cryptocurrency. So they have a token, I think it's called, I can't even remember what it's called. It's a kind of a Web3 name. But the point being is that you move, you get active, it records that, they get all the data, of course, but they're giving you your token back. So the more you move, the more you earn. You can then sell that on the free market for cash if you so wish, or you can hold these tokens and keep them. The way into it is that you must have an NFT that's a sneaker, so that's your kind of ticket for entry. So that's a model for them. They sell these sneakers. Once you have this sneaker, and so this is where Adidas is coming, then you can attach it to, I think it can be attached to your Apple Watch or any other fitness device. There's a few integrations here. And obviously it brings in, social. There's very much like the Strava type idea where you're actually then talking to other people, other users, able to compete and have leaderboards. And yeah, like I said, it has fitness integration. So we're starting to see this move more really mainstream, but it's an interesting use case, I guess, for spurring participation. Yeah. Other than access to this, right? Access to earn these tokens. Oh, the price. Yeah, it depends really. I think you might be spending $30-40 in the hype phase of Web3. These things were trading for thousands of dollars, ridiculously, like tulip mania. But I think the ones that went on sale from Adidas were about $50. So yeah, you're buying into this community, and then you can earn tokens. Sometimes, yeah, there's scarcity to it. People will buy them because, yeah, they're a limited edition, they want them. There might be portability into, say, these gaming environments, like you could buy these sneakers and then put them on your avatar in your Roblox game. I know that sounds weird, but don't forget 20% of these 80 million daily users change their avatar daily. So, again, really foreign for us in this room, but not foreign for a younger generation. Any other questions? Okay, so these are all the weird things, wonderful things that are sort of working, but really why care, right? Like, who cares if this is the sort of thing that's happening? And really, I just ask these questions to yourself. How much of your life is already online? How much of your identity resides there? How much do you socially interact there? And I know my life in the last, again, post-COVID, right, has really gone this way. I literally just need my computer and a Zoom connection. I can basically work from wherever in the world. But then this is really it for me, is like, now consider how much the younger generation is going to be there, right? So sons, daughters, nephews, nieces, they're likely to do that in the future. And then who do we want to control that world? Do we want that control in, say, 5 companies? Or do we actually prefer a decentralized internet that's got this trust and permissionless, interaction and ownership that's distributed? So it really comes down to an importance of ownership and control with what's coming. And Web3 is really trying to reverse, I guess, the trend from Web2, where we saw these things go into very centralized entities and just a handful of people with a lot of power, into putting that power back into essentially communities, online communities that can now become the stewards of the future of the internet as opposed to companies. So Web3 really empowers us to control our online lives. We should be the stewards of our own data, and we should be able to monetize it if we wish, or keep it away if we wish. And it really, when you think about our physical worlds and how we own things and how we can operate them and choose to do what we want, and no one is really in control of that, really this internet is designed to allow us to live our digital lives like that too. Okay, that is the meaty part of the talk. We're through the kind of technology. But then that's all cool and happening, but really this is the crux of it, right? So this happens to be happening at a time that we're going through this generational change. And I think a lot of us in the room will know these stats and know what's going on here. But as we see this generation come through, they are the first never to know a life without the internet. 32% of the world's population, the biggest population in history, and it's digital first everything. They have really values-based. They're into, inclusivity, sustainability, social justice. They do not stay quiet. They expect people to participate in those conversations and also stand up for what they believe in. Very much used to short-form content. That's just how they've grown up. It's what they expect. They need it on demand. They don't expect to wait for anything, and if they do, they'll go elsewhere. And used to these platforms like TikTok, like YouTube. And their participation in anything really has gone from what we used to kind of treat people like as consumers as passive. Now they're very active. They prefer to co-create. They prefer to personalise. They want to give their own flavour to things, and they want some agency here. So they are here. They are now, and they are very different. So to go through some of their preferences, I think this is kind of this now stitches together with the internet. Changes on the internet and changes in technology, and you can sort of see where the whole steer is going. But as I mentioned, they prefer to be active over passive. So they have this desire for like consumption beyond just passive. They want to connect, they want to belong, and they want to collaborate. And by and large, they obviously do this online. But what we actually start to see is, instead of just being a passive consumer at the end that we used to go, cool, how do we find you and get you back? They now become the multipliers. And the brands or the big companies that are doing this well tend to be platforms that enable this. So the biggest companies today are ones that are allowing influencers then to make money or have their, what they call the creator economy on top of it. And what Web3 is going to be able to do is actually enable that ownership piece, which is currently missing. And it can become a very powerful tool for engagement, especially to this generation. This generation is really moving global versus local, right? If they're online, they have access to everyone. We are now very much global citizens. And again, this is more and more coming the way. So they find their communities online. We used to sit in a world where blood and soil were the most important things. That's what shaped us, that's what we were around, and that's what made us connect to or tether to the world. But really now what we're doing is, instead of a shared location being the most important thing, the shared interest is the most important thing. And you can find your people anywhere on this internet. If you're into a certain type of crochet, there is a group for that already. It already exists. So for sport, what we've been is so deeply rooted in a physical community. That's where we're born from, what we started in. We're now feeling, I guess, this physical presence and changes, and that really is posing tough challenges. We're seeing, a disconnect between this generation because they have the world at their fingertips. We're definitely seeing this. Virtual become more important than physical. So as I have mentioned and alluded to before, this generation value digital goods as much as or more than their physical counterparts. And I can't stress that enough. There's 80 million daily users on Roblox. There's that stat again. It's 18% actually change their avatar daily, so they really, really prioritise this. $54 billion was spent last year on virtual goods. That is all across all platforms, not just Roblox. But today, 40% of Gen Z are actually more socially active in video games, not just online, but in video games than they are in the physical world. So really, 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 we are seeing a big change. And we're also seeing the move from broad platforms into really cozy ones. And this is what I mentioned before. If you've got a certain type of crochet you're into, there's a space for you on the internet that's already carved out. And if you don't have it, you can always create it, right? So what we're seeing is very much a movement to, and there's a few different terms for this. It's called the cozy web or the dark forest. But really what's happening is instead of being on broad platforms like Facebook for your social media, Instagram still has a little bit of this generation, but it's definitely moving off this into these what they call the cozy web. And these are areas of the internet where it's a lot more private, and the actions are more meaningful and more around your shared interests. So things like WhatsApp chats are starting to become the kind of mainstay. On TikTok, they have TikTok tribes, and then also a platform called Discord, which again really boosted through the pandemic and came out the other side, was predominantly a gaming platform in its earliest days. But now what they have is servers. There's 350 million users. I think that's monthly, actually. There's 850 million messages per day. But the key thing being here is that 42% of those users are Gen Z. So this is where they are spending time, and they're really going into these servers. These servers are not advertised. You have to find your invite to them. So you have to usually know someone or go onto the right website in order to get into it. You can't just search up what's on there. And so they're becoming really, really hyper-focused on certain interests. So that's all the stuff that's happening around sport. Now, what is actually happening to sport? And again, I stare into the future. I know that most of you in this room are stuck on the day-to-day. But, let's, and this won't be anything probably surprising to you, but let's look into, obviously, how this is then impacting. So Gen Z and sports fandom. So, how do they sort of engage? And again, these stats are not surprising probably to anyone in this room. But what we're seeing is that only 53% of Gen Z actually identify as a fan of sports, and that's compared with 69% of millennials and 63% of all adults. So we're seeing a much lower engagement rate from that generation. Less sport is consumed, so 25% will watch live sport compared with 50% of millennials. And they're more likely never to watch live sport. So if they're less likely to watch sport or be a sport fan, if they do, their fandom tends to start at the player level. So they're actually interested in players, the sport, and then like leagues and things like that are around the sport. So noting that they're likely to follow an athlete or a person that's actually playing the sport, and that's likely to be in a digital medium. And most, if they are going to consume it, it'll be on social media, it'll be in that short form content. With YouTube actually the standout. If they're going to consume sport, they'll do it on YouTube. So in terms of engagement or fandom, but then participation, we are starting to see, obviously, globally, participation rates lull. It's not necessarily dropping from the stats and data that I've seen, but it's not looking great either. But the motivations are different, right? The motivation really comes down to this personal fulfillment, wellness, and social connection as opposed to competition. And again, if you think about everything in their world, it's on demand, right? So they prefer much more casual and flexible ways to participate over the sort of the structured regime or any kind of form of club membership. So that's it. The youth engagement is decreasing slightly worldwide, but they're changing the mode of their engagement. So there's a real decline in, say, team participation in sports. But what we are seeing is this on-demand, things that I can go pick up and do whenever I feel like it. I don't actually need a teammate. I don't need any organisation around that. I can just go out and do it. Things like running, climbing, dance, and then I've got a bit later, but even individual manifestations of team sports that are coming out. And then obviously a rise in digital and esports. So we've seen a big surge in esports recently, and participation amongst young people with platforms like Twitch, which you might be familiar with, which essentially streams gaming mostly. But then games like EAFC and NBA 2K really gaining popularity. So there's no doubt that what we saw from the pandemic has accelerated this behaviour and what's coming because of the lockdowns, because of the social distancing. But the interesting thing is they are playing, it's just quite different to the rules that we are traditionally used to. So how does that change the role for sport in society? In my opinion, really what we're doing is, and this comes from systems emerging, any living system will always change and merge. And what sport's really doing is actually transitioning from this dominant one that we've existed in for a very long time. We're now starting to see that break away from what's actually being accepted or being desired. And what we're doing is now navigating into this emergent one. And that is incredibly tough to navigate. We all know what that's like with any level of change, and we're talking about an entire industry within a crazy time with technology. But I want to impart some thought starters for today to see how we might be able to make our way through this. Okay, so could there be a new pathway to participation? So as a sport, I think it's really important to get our heads around that the first time someone might pick up your ball would be in Roblox. We're already in that world today, and that world is more and more so coming for us. So if you are not there and you do not exist there, do you even exist? We really have to start thinking like this. And this is why we see so many brands pour into these platforms and put a lot of money behind getting in there, because if they're not there, they aren't relevant. So we are obviously seeing growth of esports. Really, the way that these are things, the reason these are growing is because it's accessible. More people will have access to the internet than they do, say, equipment or boots or the ability to get from A to B with a parent that's busy or working. So accessibility, convenience, they get their social interaction from these platforms now. It's also entertaining and it's inclusive, right? So you could be in a wheelchair and still play the game online just like anyone else could. Globally, we see 11 million EAFC players. But the crazy thing is in some regions, there is faster growth into EAFC than there is actually football. And I think mainly that's around Asia at this point in time. The good news being that esports, and there's studies out there to prove it, actually can enhance a person's willingness to take part in a physical nature. And we are really seeing this work from, if you look at an engagement from Gen Z into traditional sports, the top of the list now for Gen Z, basketball and football and they've got the biggest gaming presence, and they've been present in that gaming world for the last 2 decades, right? So they've managed to stay relevant. They've managed to stay with this generation as they've gone. Both of those games prioritise the players, so the player profile is the main thing. We know that they love that then, they follow them on social, and that they become really part of the game. And what we're seeing is that, the local park with its basketball hoop, people will still go down and shoot the hoop. They may not play basketball, but they're down there doing the activity that they spend a lot of time online doing. So the future of sports participation is likely to start digital. That is now the new top of the funnel. And carefully crafted, it can lead to physical. At this point in time, there isn't really a purposeful connection there, but it can come. So I think the key takeout here is really that traditional sports needs to embrace digital and these virtual experiences to drive that physical participation in order to remain relevant and connected to these younger generations. It's likely that all sports will need some sort of digital presence. Another way is to connect them globally. So again, we have our heads in New Zealand, that's all fair enough, that's the way it's been. But it's looking apparently that's no really longer enough. So is there an opportunity then for us to rethink how we connect with the local participants and actually create and connect and foster connections abroad? So how do you play a part then? The question I guess to ask you is how do you play a part in the world of your sport? So what's happening at a global or macro level in your sport, and how can you bring that to New Zealand? Could it be running virtual competitions and events? We've seen Zwift for cycling as a really good example of how to connect it, quite instantly connect a cycling community globally. And I think the thing here is that some of these things already exist. You might be in a sport where they don't exist, but someone will come and fill that space. Someone will find that space. Maybe we are the ones to fill that space, or maybe the ones to partner with them. But it's a really interesting model where, figure out what your sport might have and how you might be able to tap into it. Another option could be interactive online training sessions. So offering trainings by top athletes or coaches to engage people wherever they may sit, right? So can you find a way for your sport to get into the living rooms of homes all around New Zealand? Could be live streamed to allow real-time interaction, or offer these recorded sessions to be that more on-demand model. Are there alternative ways to engage, right? So if younger generations are seeking that need for connection and agency, is there a way to, bring them under the hood, drive that sort of bottom-up change? And this is an example that, we are seeing. This one's particularly one that's actually started in America. It's called All In for Sport. It's a DAO, really around the sport of basketball, but from the bottom up, right? So these are fans of basketball. They've come together to create this All In for Sport model, which is very much a community kind of driven public good view of basketball. And what they've actually done is started to work with the Philippines government to take a community approach to fostering change, right? So what they've actually done is created these courts in real life and put on events and all sorts of things that the community come into. But to create these manifestations, these physical manifestations, what they did was digital twin them first. So they allowed the community to come and go, if we had this space and we were going to design it, what would it look like? So these people are really, really connected to what's coming in the physical world instead of just building it and going, hope you like it. They've brought them into the process right from the start, so they actually feel this connection and with this space because they helped to actually create it. So this community-driven approach can unlock new opportunities, I think, for grassroots and anything community-led. So is there, I guess, an arm in your sport or a model in your sport where there could be a space for this on the side? It doesn't actually have to govern and run the whole thing, but is there a space that, hey, we're going off to do this thing, who wants to be involved, can we do it together? Is there a new way to play? So if unstructured social, these individual styles of sport are really popular amongst this generation, and they value this flexibility and this convenience and this sort of personal fulfillment as opposed to the need to necessarily compete in the traditional sense. Is there a way to then start trying to offer this as your organisation? And so it could be obviously emphasising the flexibility. I think there's really interesting models that we've allowed to be around social sport, we've allowed to be privatised. But is there models there that we can actually bring those under the hood of national governance to go, well, here's your social league. We'll monetize that. We'll keep the money and the value that's created there within the ecosystem. There's obviously opportunities to partner and create innovative solutions with these gaming and these fitness apps that we're seeing. And the examples here are actually team sports. And the reason I put them up is because, you go, cool, I'm not an individual sport, that kind of keeps me out of it. But there are ways now to, as a team sport, find a way for them to play solo. Like, how do they pick up your bat or your piece of equipment or whatever it might be in their new world? And that is now the new top of the funnel. They may not actually end up playing 11-a-side down here, but maybe there's a way for them to integrate on the way down. So, final thoughts. Really, we're in a world where change is the only constant, right? And very cliche to say that, but standing still is really akin to moving backwards at this point in time. It is a big transition to navigate. It's not a simple one. I don't by any means think that my 4 slides are going to change the world for you. But really, I encourage you to think digital first. I encourage you to think how active participation can be the thing that you do, and how can we then broaden or make our structures that we've got much more flexible to allow that kind of engagement. And with that, I'm opening up to questions. I have got one here, so let me read this one first. Okay, this is from Michelle Hayward. How do you join a DAO or get involved in a small way to understand better? This is a really, really good question, right? And the important thing to mention is that most things are permissionless. You don't actually need to ask anyone permission. You could simply go on and find them. What DAO would I recommend you join? Obviously, there is RugbyDAO, which, of course, I would say. And I would find one that is free to participate. Don't need to put any money into it to learn. RugbyDAO is one of those. But you can really just either reach out to me and see what kind of interest levels or interests you have, and I can probably point you in a direction. But by being involved and being part of it is a really, really good way to learn firsthand, so I can't encourage that more. Any other hands or...
Take one more team and then into our next session down in that room. You might have got one.
Yeah.
Hey, Leanne, thank you. Web3 must be really confronting for the 5 major corporations and any kind of
Very much so, yeah.
power structures. What are they doing to fight back against Web3, and where do you think it's going until Web4? There's a parallel between here and...
Yeah, absolutely. There is a Web 4. It's called the spatial web. We will need another day to go into that. There will be, this is something that will move and change. You're right. The 5 companies mostly are leaning into it, but what you'll see is that they're playing in the spaces that they can fight back. That is around AI. So all of those major companies are really heavily leaning into AI because they have the data. With the blockchain side of things, we did see Meta start to take an angle here, and they've actually withdrawn. The people that were doing it have gone out on their own and now have their own blockchain. What they will probably do is keep their walls up, their walled garden, right? They have a lot of us already. The leaky bucket, they will probably just try to prevent for as long as they can. I think that's what will happen, but watch this space. Okay? Awesome. We're good? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. So hopefully you've all taken some learnings away. I think one thing that someone explained to me is that if you think about this at a grassroots level, it's a governance perspective, that in say 10, 15 years time, that our decisions of what's happening in our sports and our clubs can sit with those users, those tamariki and rangatahi that are using such platforms that they engage with every day, which we have honestly probably no idea about, but only just scratched the surface in. So it's a really cool thing. And just on the behalf of everyone, Leanne, we just want to thank you for your time today and the knowledge you've passed on. So
Thank you. Something even more crazy.